Hello everyone, and welcome to this week's Dev Diary, focusing on the focus tree of Hungary. It should be easy for us to stay focused on this Danubian focal point, as in this Dev Diary, the layout is actually quite simple. For each section of the tree, we can enjoy a brief summary before a selection of focus reveals, hopefully making this more of a sprint to get through. With that all being said, let's go straight into the Dev Diary. So, for those who are unfamiliar with the series, Hungary, being part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, actually lost to the previous game of Risk, and thus was shafted with debuffs after debuff, despite their best efforts to avoid it by going indie retro. Fast forward to 2017, and Hungary gets a focus tree, in Death and Dishonor. Catch up to the present, and you arrive at this Hungarian focus tree, which aims to match the vibes of the previous iteration. What hasn't stayed the same is Horthy, with his new trendy profile picture, so I'm sure he'll be getting plenty of swipes on Hoinder. For those who are interested, here's a quick overview of the entire Hungarian focus tree, which I think easily makes more than double the previous focuses from the old Hungary focus tree. Taking a look at the starting national spirits of our previously defeated Hungary, we can see some new unique interactions, such as the Gombos trade treaty, allowing you to trade with Germany for weapons, despite the Treaty of Trianon. The PP hit sucks though. Despite that, we're looking at not too terrible national spirits, consumer goods factory reduction, recruitable population factor bonuses with the Hungarian National Defence, Levant associations giving more recruitable population factor. I wouldn't say things are entirely terrible. Of course, all of that is caveated by the Treaty of Trianon, really the central thing that is completely destroying Hungary. The reductions to recruitable population are always terrible, factory output, but the military factory construction speed, possibly the worst part about it. We do not just start with national spirits, but of course a national government, led by Miklos Horthy, who actually has even more buffs. Stability and war support is good as a regent of Hungary, but another political power gain hit on top of the previous one? Well, I'm sure that we don't have a prime minister called Gombos who also is attacking our political power gain. Adding up all of the debuffs, it seems that we have a negative 35% political power gain. It seems like politics clearly aren't simple in Budapest. Alright, let's get started with the meat of a dev diary, the Hungarian focus tree. So, taking a look at the connecting industry and military trees that they've called the common branch, we can see it's actually quite similar to the previous industry and military trees from Death and Dishonor, visually, but with more content in there for good measure. Starting on the top left with the industry tree, we can see a choice economically between one, legendary civ and some political power, or interventionism, which gives us another minus 10% to political power gain, pushing us to 45% debuff. With the amount of political power gain debuffs, I'm starting to wonder how important political power is to Hungary. The dev diary continues by saying that the main goal of the industrial branch is to get to the GYOR program and get it up and running, because it's within here that you're going to find most decisions to be able to start building up your industry. Here we can take a look at some of the decisions that become available once taking the focus, giving you things like mills, factories, production of iron, and further additional decisions to continue the previously made decisions. So in many ways, this feels like the Turkish focus tree, where they didn't necessarily have a massive industry tree. It was very unified, but a lot of the building up of your industry actually happened through decisions. Of course, decisions cost political power, and there's one thing we've seen about the starting situation of Hungary: they don't have too much political power, so maybe these two things are more connected than we realise. With that brief look at industry now over, we now take an even briefer look at some of the military tree. It begins with a very familiar secret rearmament, just like it did in the old tree, and from there follows a path akin to old Hungary, but with more meat on the bones. With not too many focuses revealed, we're going to have to use our intuition, but we can see there is now a focus to support our Finnish brothers, should they find themselves at odds with the Soviets. On the bottom right, there seems to be a line of focuses about building up the Arpad line, so maybe you can become the true heir of the Maginot. And lastly, we get to see one revealed focus in the form of allied manufacturing programs, where by taking it, it will give you a buff to your faction leader, which is an interesting mechanic to think about because of its wider applications. I'm thinking about, could you maybe take advantage of it by finding a way to join the Chinese United Front and effectively long distance buffing China against Japan from all the way in Europe? Regardless, most of the focuses in this section are kind of a mystery, so I'm afraid we're going to have to wait until the release to find out what they do. Now, moving on to the historical branch, which involves our main man of the hour, Horthy. While previously you would work down the tree, eventually becoming a fash collaborator, Horthy must now maintain some level of neutrality in this updated historical tree, straddling the line as Germany tries to overthrow you and install a German puppet leader of their own. So by going down the focus tree and trying to figure out what we can from the images seen, the regent of Horthy will be reinforced, and you'll try and work your way down to have some level of autonomy in a neutral state, making sure that neither the Germans or any other party try and stop you from holding your current position. Moving on further down, we try and renounce the Treaty of Trianon, which is consistent with the old Hungarian focus tree, and then near the bottom we can see renew the Rome Protocols or join Germany, again consistent with the old focus tree. What's slightly changed, and I maybe more so than slightly, is on the very bottom of the tree we can see reaffirmed territorial claims has been quite updated with far more claims all across the board, ultimately leading to a revised and better looking Proclaim Greater Hungary focus. It's also worth mentioning that, as far as I can see, every single one of those territorial claims begins with the word demand, so it could be okay to suggest that absolutely none of this section requires you to go to war. You can just demand, and get everything you want. Taking a look at the 4 focuses that have been revealed to us, we can see in the top left that they're not too crazy. Crackdown on extremism kind of is self-explanatory. We have reinforcing Horthy's reign, where you're trying to stay non-aligned as best as you can. The Turl Association, which it certainly looks interesting in its art, is actually not too crazy in the spirit it gives you, again trying to preserve your ideology, but also giving you some research speed. And finally, Proclaim Greater Hungary, which changes your tag and also gives you a nice national spirit, stability, war support, resistance, and compliance game. All in all, I'm not seeing anything too crazy here, just some nice little buffs as you try and keep Horthy in charge. And so it would seem, when all is said and done, that forming a large, formidable Hungary with little conflict may be possible as the final goal of historical Hungary, although in some circumstances it may be within your interest to pursue an expanded front, especially with Yugoslavia if you actually want a coastline. This would also mean that you don't have to get into a war by committing to siding with the Axis, and so maybe you could betray them later on if you took this path. As a side note, that symbol over Bucharest, do we think that's going to be related to the new raid mechanic? Could be. Sticking with the Horthy side of the focus tree by continuing the Regency, we're going to take a path to the right and maybe become a little more proactive in joining Germany by undermining the Admiral. In doing so, the man who I believe is Prime Minister, called Gombos, surely said correctly, will replace him as regent and ultimately send you on a path to the Brown. Note the very good defense on core territory, by the way. That might come in handy. Of course, not everyone will be happy with your choice in a man called Gombos, surely said correctly, and so dealing with a minor coup at the doors of the capital will be in order. Luckily, a coup is a good justification to get rid of the Treaty of Trianon, so honestly, I'm okay with it. Getting rid of that treaty is such a priority. If you do choose to stick with Gombos, you can take a look at him here, popular among the paramilitaries, and notable because in this image he hasn't actually turned the nation fash yet, so it might be possible to stay non-aligned as Gombos. Or alternatively, you can just fully commit to the fash path and take a guy called, now how do I say that, Ferenc or Ferenc? I'm not quite sure, but regardless, he does have some good buffs across the board. Justify war goal time is always useful. The focus tree itself is predominantly shared with the historical branch, just with some changes to the early game, so anything south below is about forming Greater Hungary through the same mechanisms we saw earlier, but on top we can see a little bit about trying to overthrow Horthy and then some of the powers you can get on the more fash side of Hungary. Akin to what we saw with the historical branch as well, the focuses aren't actually too dramatic, mostly about converting national spirits or giving traits, with Hungarian life movement giving division attack and defense on core territory, as well as the Arpad's successor also giving you attack and defense against major countries, so really about buffing up your army. Wherever the cross points is also another focus that's good for giving you justify war goal time, so really a very expansionist path for Hungary, as well as showing off demand Carpathian Ruthenia near kind of slowly towards the bottom of the tree, where you start demanding the different territories to form Greater Hungary. That is not all though, because there are two additional focuses not visible on the focus tree. When I scrolled through it, I did not see them, and that is because they are hidden and will be unlocked later on if you follow the Tyrannist ideas of Hungarian origin. I imagine it's going to be like the Papal States in the Italy focus tree, where once you've gone Papal, the section of the focus tree will actually unlock. So this is one of those hidden focus tree branches, I think. And as you can see, the focuses are, I'd say, much more interesting. Improving the national defense by plus 10% attack and 15 defense on cores is extremely good, and then our ancestral lands gives you claims on 164 states, I believe. From some of the state names we saw Sofia, so that means we're going to be going into Bulgaria and claiming as far south as here if we take the path, but also I think I saw Altai Krai, or however it's pronounced, which isn't it here? Here it is, somewhere in the Soviet Union. So you're going to be claiming all of this region, if that's to be believed, which is quite a significant Hungary. I guess the only other question is, once you've claimed it, is there the ability to core it and then do a proper Hungarian playthrough? Monarchism, monarchism, monarchism. Said thrice and still it's not enough, because in the new Hungarian focus tree there are a plethora of monarchist candidates and branches to choose from that are out to rival the Polish monarchist focus tree. In the old Hungarian focus tree we can see there used to be 3 different options: Mecklenburg, Sweden and a Habsburg. Well, now it's time to bolster that up to 5 expanded branches with 6 so far confirmed monarchs on the shelf. We can see the Mecklenburg German king is still here, the Swedish Democratic king is still here, a new dynasty has completely brought up, as well as 2 Habsburgs, so they've actually multiplied themselves. Habsburg mitosis goes crazy. Here we can see 4 of the different candidates. There are 2 more, but sadly they're not shown right now, and that is almost certainly an updated image of Frederick Franz. The Otto one, I'm pretty sure that's always looked like that. Starting on the left, we have what used to be my low-key guilty pleasure, the Hungarian branch of Frederick Franz of Mecklenburg-Schwerin. I've always liked the idea of this path because I just thought it would be funny if it had access to a unique Mecklenburg-Hungary decision. I'm wondering if I've talked about it on this channel before years ago. Something to rival the Austro-Hungarians of old. Well, as it turns out, Paradox have actually done it. A decision that if you betray the Germans, you can use your historic claim to Mecklenburg to core it and bring it into the fold. I am truly, as minor as it is, really, really happy to see this. It's such a small little tidbit of flavour, but it's such a great bit of flavour. It's thematic, it makes sense within the context. I just love everything about it. It's so silly, it's so small, but I'm a huge fan. If you do choose to go the way of Mecklenburg, there isn't actually too much for me to talk about, because his focus tree path actually goes straight to Tyrol Association, the historical and fash branch, and then forms Greater Hungary through the same mechanisms, so joining the Axis, Rome protocols, etc. So yeah, kind of the same thing as before. Maybe you can avoid some major conflicts, but it is worth mentioning, if the goal is to get to Mecklenburg and you have access to Rome protocols, you can create a faction with Italy and Austria. As such, it may not be as crazy to think that it is possible to go on your ambition to claim Mecklenburg. Maybe there's a fun playthrough to be had on this side of the tree. Moving on to the world of constitutional monarchy, the old democratic king focus branch was, well, let's be honest, it's possibly one of the worst trees in the game. You get Karl, you flip to democratic, you want to maybe make a faction, join allies, don't join allies, and you're kind of done. Well, now we can see much more flavour. The Balkan Pact focus has been reworked to directly invite Romania and unlock the ability to invite other nations beyond your duo act of guaranteed defeat. Speaking of guarantees, we can also guarantee religious liberties, which gives us new access to special projects, the mechanic that's coming with this DLC, meaning Hungary can become a nuclear powerhouse fueled by Romanian resources and whoever else you can get on board. And the focus at the end of the tree, called Hold Territorial Referendums, allows you to try and regain old land peacefully. Although the conditions are obscure, as they seem to be behind decisions, we could be seeing another way to form Greater Hungary. I just wonder to what extent those referendums are going to be held. I wonder how it all works out. With some of the more traditional options now covered, let's start getting a bit more off the rails. Horthy is a familiar character, but he's only named regent. So what if we skip the namesake and level all the way to monarch? With Establish a New Dynasty, you can promote the admiral to a more regnal office, or alternatively, if you know his days are probably going to come to an end, you can name his much more popular son to be king. Sadly, whether you choose to go a democratic king or the Horthy way, I don't think the Germans are going to be best pleased with it, as well as the more fash elements within your nation, so you will have to deal with their counter-protest, which, if not left stamped out, could develop into a full-scale civil war. In terms of how the coup happens, it reminds me of the Bulgarian coup that can happen. Is it Zveno, where if you leave them untouched, they can rise up, but you can ultimately take decisions to stamp out the Arrow Cross Party. Unfortunately, this section of the dev diary doesn't tell us anything about the Horthy monarchy, so I guess we have to figure it out for ourselves. There does seem to be a focus allowing you to maybe join the Allies, which could be useful. Also, staging an uprising in Leitha. I'm pretty sure that's a river on the border between Germany and Austria, so maybe about pushing a border conflict and gaining a state. And then Declaration of Intentions seems to be about just straight up war goals against Yugoslavia, Czechoslovakia and Romania. Once you've taken one of these focuses, there is an option whether you want to fight against communism or ride a high horse. Now that is something we are going to have to talk about imminently. But before we talk about horses, it's Habsburg time. Going forward, there are now 2 Habsburg candidates for king. There's going to be good old Otto from the old Austro-Hungarian Empire focus tree, but now Palatine Joseph August and his shared goal to be on a high horse like Horthy and form Greater Hungary. Also similar to Horthy, we don't get to see too much of what every focus does, but of the 3 we can see, they are far more massive in terms of their scope than, say, the historical branch. So let's go through them. The old Habsburg king, well, that's going to be great. That's buffs to recruitable population, division defense, 20% political power gain, generate war goal tension. I mean, just solid buffs all the way down. Moving south, revenge for the Brusilov offensive. Going to war with the Soviet Union, very dangerous, but look at the decision. Establish a Ukrainian kingdom. I mean, think about the manpower, the industry you can get from that as a puppet state. I mean, that is just quite remarkable. And then I don't even know where this one goes, on a high horse. After getting a very nice national spirit called the Apostolic Kingdom, you can create factions, but you can no longer join them. It's effectively you against the entire world. 84 countries will suddenly all hate you and refuse to trade with you. You claim tons of states all across Europe, in Germany, in the Czech Republic, you name it, and then you get war goals against all of the major participants. I mean, this is like going for complete European unification run on a high horse. I am so interested, and that makes me wonder if Horthy or the Habsburg candidate both want to go world star on a high horse, conquer all of Europe. Is there a formable for conquering all of Europe? I'm talking a European Union, or, as I mentioned on day one, some form of renewed Holy Roman Empire, because it says there, the Apostolic Kingdom. I mean, there is some holy elements within there. I'm just saying, EU or HRE, Unified Europe, could be on the table. Okay, I apologize if I was yapping too much there, but I get excited about the idea of these, very rapid expansionist focus tree paths. I think they're far more fun than the ones where you just get small buffs and you have to figure it out. It's why I like Italy. I think Italy's very fun. But regardless, it's time to talk about Otto von Habsburg. Otto brings us back to his historical ambitions with wanting to reform the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and it seems to match its previous iteration in the flow of events, but with more flavour and options to choose from. Looking at the old Hungarian focus tree, we can see it was pretty straightforward. You invite him and try to hold a referendum within Austria to form Austro-Hungary. Then you go after Czechoslovakia, Romania, you try and match with Yugoslavia and Poland, and then, if you really want, claim the empire, which includes Italy, Jerusalem, parts of Germany, I believe. There's a lot to go for. Well, in this focus tree, it's not too dissimilar. We can see that after trying to get a monarch in place, you have to work towards unifying with Austria. There's the Austria Restoration down there, and then there's Protect Czechoslovakia, reclaiming Transylvania, trying to go after Hungarian Galicia. It's very similar, but it also feels very updated. Additionally, on the left, there seems to be a whole selection of faction-related focuses. The Grand Alliance, is this with the Allies potentially? A Habsburg alliance is almost certainly a faction of your own, and then the alliance with the Kaiser if Germany so happens to go monarchist. Oh, and that's not all beyond expansionism and making factions, because this tree also comes with a joint focus tree for the Majesty of Austria-Hungary, which we can take a quick look at. Similar to what we saw with the Nordic faction, there seems to be a section dedicated towards the army, including one for the hussars, which is pretty funny. There seems to be a central economic policy, going straight down the middle, as well as with some science, and then on the right there seems to be an industry tree, hopefully about building factories for all the different members. And then at the bottom there are 3 focuses with an importance on the 1,000-year federation. But with all of those different focuses, here's the main thing you need to take away. The core thing is that the nations still exist individually as partners to their main leader, with a new puppet system called Austro-Hungarian vassal state. That means if you do want to unite the vassals into one central core nation, like you used to be able to do, that is still accessible, both at the bottom of the Otto focus tree, but also at the bottom of the joint focus tree with the 1,000-year federation I was just talking about. Luckily, we do get to see some of the focuses, so let's take a look. The Lands of the Crown of St. Stephen is actually available quite early on, and allows you to become known as the Transleviathan Kingdom, getting cores all around you, specifically in Romania, and then unlocking the Austro-Hungarian joint focus tree. So unlocking that focus tree is actually pretty early on in the focus. Below that we can see Restore the Kingdom of Lombardy-Venetia, and I have to say this one is quite remarkable. Scrolling down so we can see it better, we can see this focus allows you to gain claims on the Kingdom of Lombardy-Venetia states and then get a war goal against Italy to go take them, as well as a decision to then place a Habsburg on said throne. You might be interested to know that this puppet nation, whatever we're going to call it, actually exists in game currently. You can see it here, the Kingdom of Lombardy-Venetia. So by taking this, you're effectively going to war with Italy to try and take all these states, which is quite a lot. And that's not all, because to the right of it we see Demand a Viadis Restoration, where the Albanian Kingdom, I guess Albania has been renamed in this update, also can be demanded to restore a union with Austria-Hungary, So maybe Albania is going to get some content towards joining Austria-Hungary. That's also good because it means you can go for Albania, maybe you can bring them into Austria-Hungary and then use it as a justification for Italy to declare war on you, thus meaning you're in a defensive war, and then you get the buffs, which should be easier for you to go for the Kingdom of Lombardy-Venetia. And then finally at the bottom, we have what are potentially some of the more funny and very powerful focuses. Reclaim the Holy City. So if you want to play some CK3 and you want to do it in Horror 4, then I've got some good news because Palestine is claimed by the Kingdom of Hungary and you can demand its annexation from the UK. If they accept, you get to own Palestine, and I guess that is a successful crusade. Next to the focus, we actually see a scroll bar, and maybe I'm just being picky, maybe I'm being too demanding, okay? I can accept that, but this is just for me. I really would like if there was the option to maybe push a little bit further, maybe be greedy in the negotiations, specifically to get Jordan. The thing is, if you happen to demand Palestine from the United Kingdom, you end up in a very strange position with land taken. You're still like inside of the major Allied territory. Jordan becomes isolated from the UK, and if they've got any troops here, they're kind of stuck unless they have access through France. I don't know, it really breaks things up in a very weird way. While if you go Palestine and Jordan, you know, you have core access to the Middle East, which makes more sense, and Britain doesn't have isolated territory. Maybe if Britain had a port here, maybe, but otherwise it's a very strange arrangement of territory. And finally, for the Otto von Habsburg branch, at the bottom we have Renovatio Imperii, which means that you can go from the Kingdom of Hungary to Austria-Hungary, although I guess you wouldn't be called the Kingdom of Hungary by now, wouldn't you be called like the Trans-Leviathan Kingdom, or whatever it was called? Regardless, this unlocks the decisions for you to be able to start annexing your imperial subjects, coring them as well, which is really good. I mean, does this mean we get to core Palestine? Does this mean we get to core Northern Italy? It must do, right? This isn't exactly talked about inside the dev diary, but I want to talk about it regardless because there's even more potentials in here. By going down the Habsburg alliance, you can see you can place Maximilians on claims in Mexico, go straight for the entirety of Poland, and even try and create the Kingdom of Ukraine, which we saw in the other Habsburg path. Does this mean you can also core these places? I mean, coring Ukraine, coring Mexico, like, there are Georgia's even here. I mean, my goodness. I really wonder how many cores are possible by taking this focus. As we come closer to the end of the dev diary, I hope you can forgive me for only briefly touching upon the democratic and communist section, the beginning requiring a mandatory civil war regardless of which way you want to go down. We don't see too much of the Civil War or even what any of the opening focuses do, but it seems that after ending the White Terror, you have some focuses to prepare yourself for reviving the spirit of 1848, and then, once all is done, you can have some elections to choose your leader. Upon winning, we can see which fighter we're going to choose. Some of the available characters include Walter White, the newly updated Eggman, and someone I'm pretty sure is Lex Friedman. In terms of the different paths, I actually don't think they're necessarily too expansive, especially on the communist side. I mean, they're pretty limited in how far you can go down, but in the Republic side, there are two central options, a Danubian Federation and approach to the diaspora. And we can see a brief look at some of the focuses themselves. So a Danubian Federation, which to me seems to be one of the more interesting ones, because you can create the faction, the Danubian Federation, but you also gain access to the joint focus tree, as in the Austro-Hungarian joint focus tree. And then that makes me wonder, who can get invited to the Federation? And at the bottom of the focus tree, there's the options to start annexing and coring people in the faction. So, I don't know, how does that work with the Danubes? I mean, if I start inviting random people, can I integrate them maybe? I mean, that could be really crazy. It might even open up to some kind of European Union semi kind of focus belief, isn't it? It's a democratic unification and then slowly integrating them into a federalized union. If the faction path isn't to your liking, on the right we also have Reclaim the Pannonian Steppe. By taking this democratic focus, you gain claims on tons of different territories and war goals against Czechoslovakia, Austria, Romania, and Yugoslavia. So effectively this is a rapid, expansionist, democratic nation, which is very different than what we're used to seeing with democrats in HUI4. I will be interested to see just how Hungary will be able to justify this pretty reckless expansionism in the eyes of other democratic nations, because, you know, if you're going a democrat, maybe you want to join a faction, but you can't join the allies if you've generated world tension, and something tells me going to war with all those nations might generate quite a bit of world tension. As for the communist tree, we are split between two age-old decisions: joining the Comintern or going it alone and forming our own faction, predominantly in the Baltic region. Equally familiar, we can see there's buffs to research and industry as you side with the Soviets and effectively become their bulwark in the West, while on the right, you work towards forming a Greater Hungary, just as we saw with historical, etc., but it's a revolutionary Greater Hungary, which ultimately leads to you being able to go to war with the Soviets. Taking a look at the Comintern-sided focuses, we can see goulash communism, which is pretty funny. I mean, the art going with it is really good, that lovely bowl there. But all in all, it's predominantly a series of national spirits. Not really too many crazy things to talk about here. International brigades for helping foreign nations in what they're doing, becoming a bulwark, some massive buffs towards division defense and minor towards attack, but you know, mostly just becoming a player underneath the Soviet direction. And then on the flip side, we have the not going communist path, reinstate the Lenin Boys, which just sounds an absolutely ridiculous name for a focus. I'm sure it's real. I'm sure there were people called the Lenin Boys. I'm sure they were paramilitary of the Communist Party operating in the Soviet Republic in 1919, but the Lenin Boys, I mean, what a name. All in all, it seems to be getting some really good buffs. I'm seeing stuff for civs and consumer goods, and we do have the Revolutionary Greater Hungary focus in the bottom left, which directly gives you cores on all the other things. You just need to make sure that you own them after going down the relevant conquests. And then ultimately, denounce Marxist-Leninism, which I mentioned earlier, gives you a puppet war goal against the Soviet Union with the war against Stalinism. And with that, we have come to the end of this dev diary. As we begin to just sweep through all of the different advisors and generals and whatnot that are in the game, I think I'm just going to talk to myself. So I think this is a really well done expansion to Hungary on the previous version that has done well to retain the core feeling of the old one. I'm a big fan of the small touches, the Ukrainian kingdom, I think that's great. The Mecklenburg claim, really well done. If that says Mecklenburg Hungary after you take it, sold. Instantly sold. I feel the central branches are really well done, as well as the monarchist branches. Now, I also want to be a little bit honest. I remain that the communist side of HUI4 is still stuck between framing the entire game through the lens of you either side with the Soviets or you don't. I'm sure there has to be some ambition to investigate other global partners. I was trying to think, what could you do? Maybe dedicating some supply, like interest in Asia, where you've heard about Mao Zedong. You maybe need to set up an airport in some territory, try and fly supplies in to help Mao take over China. Maybe alternatively, you could have a communist nation that's like a peacekeeping force that's trying to take advantage of other nations' affairs. So maybe there's a focus tree about, maybe as a communist Hungary, you're provoking a conflict between Greece and Turkey, and then you are able to spawn a third communist revolutionary puppet state in between the two nations that effectively works to unite both of them as like a communist Hellas sub-state under Hungary. I was always thinking about that's a kind of weird, interesting play. You come into another two nations fight as a third participant and install a communist revolution because those two nations are fighting. You could imagine it maybe against like Peru and Ecuador. Maybe, I don't know, there's you know, wherever a civil war or an individual conflict could happen, it could be interesting to explore, but it's never done. it's really always go with the Comintern or don't go with the Comintern. So I'd be really interested to see, maybe with the Germany focus tree coming up in 2 weeks, I think, whether their communist tree is going to maybe spice things up a bit. Okay, I've yapped for way too long, so with that, I shall say thank you very much for watching. I think the Hungarian focus tree looks very good, very fun, lots and lots of replayability here. This is not something I think I'll touch once, this is something I'm going to keep coming back to explore all the different permutations you can go through. Really looking forward to it. I hope you liked this video. It's going to be Germany in 2 days, so I hope you'll stick around for that. That is kind of the main meat of the diary, the dev diary cycle. If you liked this, feel free to like, feel free to subscribe, and I'll see you all next time. Bye, 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 bye.